if you think about it, the executive director or CEO of the organization is a little bit like the conductor. The staff is conducted, the board is conducted, the key stakeholders and donors look to that person for what they do. When it's not there, when that leadership isn't there, no one knows exactly when to play and what to play.
Exude Human Capital hosts Hold On, Let Me Close My Door, bringing real HR stories from real professionals with real solutions to you. Join us as we navigate the ever-changing workplace with Alison DiFlorio, co-founder and managing partner, Exude Human Capital, and special guests.
Welcome to Hold On, Let Me Close My Door. I'm Alison DiFlorio, and I am so honored today to have a really special guest with us, Vicki Burkhart, founder and CEO of More Than Giving, to talk with us about her experience and tips around how organizations can manage through transitions when leaders change. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you, Alison. Good to be here.
We're calling this the exit ripple. What happens when leaders change? And I know, Vicki, from the conversations that I've had with you, you've gone through this numerous times and you've helped organizations and leaders navigate this somewhat rocky path at times. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you today.
It's a great topic, Allison, and it's certainly something of interest to most nonprofit organizations and other groups that are looking at transitioning. As I always say that, what applies to for-profits sometimes applies to nonprofits and vice versa. And leadership transition is certainly one that crosses the bar.
Great. Vicki, before we get started, could you share a little bit about your work and More Than Giving?
Geez, I have been in the nonprofit sector now for more than 40 years. And I served as an executive director, and I actually took the time to count it for more than 13 nonprofit organizations. So I think if I were to encapsulate my career, it is in nonprofit leadership. And along the way, learned a lot of lessons about what it takes to be a strong leader and what tools and things I needed in my role as ED and CEO. And that's where the More Than Giving company really began. And we're in business now for about 27 years. It is a nonprofit fractional staffing firm, and the intention is to fortify nonprofit teams with expertise, with nonprofit best practices, with fractional teams that can come in and help you move from point A to point B in a very flexible, affordable manner. And it's the type of support, really, Allison, that I would have hoped to have had years ago as I was navigating teams through all of this. So that's really where it's grown from. I'm happy to say that, we're still a growing firm and the needs really for nonprofits haven't changed. So as an alternative to full-time staffing, fractional staffing, I think is on the growth part for many nonprofits.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And this just makes me want to share a little bit of context before we get into our conversation today. I did a little bit of a research in planning for today, and this is, to me, a bit astounding. In the nonprofit sector, they're expecting and reporting that as many as 67% of nonprofit leaders are planning to exit within 5 years. And interestingly, in this particular report, only 27% have formal succession plans, meaning that when that knowledge, expertise, relationships, contacts go, so
Right.
does everything else.
Right.
And that, complicated by what's happening externally with potential funding cuts and just the nature of how nonprofits are competing for same buckets of dollars these days, it really creates a huge risk for an organization when a leader is going to change, or is planning, whether it's unplanned or planned,
Mhm. Yep.
and what you can do and what organizations should be thinking about to better prepare for change. So, with that in mind, what are those ripple effects that we can expect to see across an organization with clients, with employees when a key leader steps down and moves on?
Well, we're I think entering into a little bit of a talent crisis right now, to be perfectly honest with you. And whether it's a planned exit or something that happens unexpectedly, anytime there's a turnover in leadership, I think the results can vary anywhere from mild disruption to total chaos, if not well planned and well organized. If you think about it, the executive director or CEO of the organization is a little bit like the conductor. The staff is conducted, the board is conducted, the key stakeholders and donors look to that person for what they do. When it's not there, when that leadership isn't there, no one knows exactly when to play and what to play. And the external stakeholders start to get confused because what they're used to and the music that they've been hearing through the organization no longer exists. The CEO is also the face of the organization. So I think when you're talking about ripple effects to leadership change, that person that most people identify with, whether it's internal folks or external folks, is no longer there. And having the ability to gently move those relationships over to a new CEO is tremendously helpful. You don't want to have a sort of a dearth in relationship because the people that have been long-standing, committed donors and supporters or volunteers for the organization just don't know exactly who to, attach themselves to, so to speak.
Mm.
And the board of directors misses some of that leadership. So I think the board itself suffers from the ripple effects of a transition in leadership. I think, I like to call it the winning partnership when the CEO or executive director is working really strongly with the board president, board executive committee. There's a partnership there that feeds itself. They identify strengths. They work well together. That takes a while to cultivate. So anytime there's a change, whether it's planned or unplanned, I think that's a ripple effect. That relationship needs to be rebuilt. And one of the things that I've written about recently, and you and I have talked about in some of our conversations, is the fundraising piece. And when we talk about transition of leaderships, there's very little written about how it actually impacts fundraising. But your
Mhm.
CEO or executive director is typically the premier or prime fundraiser for the organization. When that individual is no longer there, again, relationships, consistency, continuum of cultivation and relationship can somewhat be strained. And so I think, again, when you're talking about ripple effects of leadership transition, you cannot disregard the impact that it could have on fundraising as well.
Yeah, and I think, you in your opening, you talked about how this can impact for-profit organizations as well. And based on what you were just saying with fundraising, I think about in for-profit organizations, that lead sales individual
Yes.
who's got the relationships and the contacts, or the lead managing partner of the law firm who's got the relationships and the contacts. If that person leaves expectedly or unexpectedly, those relationships are at risk. I serve on a couple of boards and we have gone through some transitions, and I've been through helping develop succession plans so that there is a stated policy on what the board's responsibilities are and who needs to be communicated to, but a lot of boards do not have that in place today. So, is it essential for boards and leadership teams to develop succession plans, both for expected and unexpected leadership changes?
Well, if you think about it, and I think this applies to any organization, for profit or nonprofit, you want to protect the continuity and the operational momentum that you have. You want to be able to hit your KPIs. You want to make sure that your benchmark goals keep going. You want to make sure that the staff is on steady footing, because the leader has a lot to do with setting the tone for the workplace and the work product. And I think that's very important. And I think institutional memory, relationships. This person typically has been in the role for some years and has with it accumulated a lot of institutional memory. And I think in a phrase, you want to have a good succession plan in place so that you avoid mayhem. Much better to have an organized approach to a leadership change than a, oh my God, what are we going to do next kind of approach. So it, for boards, especially, what I find is a good succession plan will provide a roadmap for them. They'll be able to think in advance, you know, do we appoint a search committee? Is this going to be something the entire board handles? Are we going to name, an executive search company? Are we going to, sort of staff this out and let professionals help us find this? Or are we going to do it in-house? Do we hire, for instance, an interim to keep things moving as we go through the recruitment process so that we don't feel hassled or harried, or rushed to find the exact right person to fit the job? I think all of those issues, along with just the nuts and bolts of timeline, how this rolls out, et cetera, should be in a really good succession plan.
I agree. And I'd also add that communication strategy,
Oh,
who is going to communicate to the top donors, to the key
yes.
stakeholders, to the staff, and who does the staff communicate to is should be spelled out very clearly so
Yeah.
that in particularly in the unforeseen or unplanned departures, it gives, to your point, someone a roadmap to follow.
We often incorporate succession into risk mitigations, and it sort of sounds like it's misplaced there. But for the very reasons you're talking about, that when you get to the point of losing a leader, again, whether it's planned or unexpected, there needs to be a point person. There needs to be a communicator. There needs to be certain people who will immediately take on roles to mitigate any miscommunications, missteps, etc. So, to your point, it's a very good one. Having that person who will be the primary communicator should be designated in that plan. And as I always say, pull the plan up, take a look at it every year, make sure that it's up to date. There's nothing like, getting into the point where you need a succession plan and pulling it out and only to see that it is 10 years old and the positions have all changed and all the rest of it. So, I think if you really want to be effective in leadership transition, it needs to be sort of an annual part of your document review.
I think that's great advice. Vicki, I want to go back to something you mentioned a couple of times in different ways about interim support. And I know that your organization does interim support in a lot of different areas of organizations, not just at the executive leader. We do interim support for the human resources role. And I think we've been talking about that most senior leader, the executive director, the CEO, but this can also be this same kind of ripple effect can happen when a senior leader of a functional area departs. We
Yes.
certainly see it on the HR side. You've probably
Yes.
seen it on the accounting and finance side and fundraising side. So, in what ways can interim leadership, and I say that meaning not just at the executive director level, but interim leadership for critical functional areas of an organization. In what ways can interim leadership serve as a bridge for the transition? And when might it be a good strategic choice to go that route rather than immediately filling a role?
I've met with so many organizations that have hurried to replace a development director, for instance, or a CFO, and only to find that they've hired the wrong person. And now they're either in a situation where they're trying to now offboard a bad hire, or that person gets very disgruntled, leaves, and they're right back in the suit. And one of the things that I always say is to give yourself enough time to really do a thorough search, whether it's a lead, CEO, or, a functional director. It takes time. And we're going through several searches right now, and I would say anywhere from 3 to 6 months to actually do a really good search, get someone onboarded, etc. 6 months is a long time to have a vacant position.
Mhm.
And it's an opportunity for an organization to do a couple of different things in my mind. Fractional or interim staffing allows you to, number one, fill the gap because you can bring on the expertise you need for exactly where you need it, whether it's in finance, development, program development. You're bringing in someone who can hit the ground running. It also gives the organization an opportunity to have fresh eyes, taking a look at what's going on, maybe even doing a little bit of an assessment, coming up with some recommendations or at least some observations for the new person to take into consideration when they are, in fact, put on board. So I see it as a sort of a double win. We've had a couple of situations where we have really been able to, I think, help the organization work through some challenges and obstacles through interim staffing. And, because it was a 9-month period of time, those obstacles were front and center when the interim came on board. So things needed to occur. It also allows the new person to come on without the baggage that was left
Yeah.
behind by the old. And I can't even say how refreshing that is. I think when you're looking at retention, when we're looking at the, sort of the competition for talent right now, being able to provide a new person, a new director or a new CEO with problems solved and opportunities abound really, I think, impacts your retention levels as well.
I agree 100%. And we certainly see that on the human resources side.
Bet you do.
You know,
Yeah.
that's a key and critical role to an organization, and finding the right person and determining the right role that you spoke about. What is the role? Are you just going to replace exactly what you had, or has the organization changed, or the needs of the organization changed, so that the role needs to be adjusted as well? So I'm a big fan of giving that space and time and the fresh set of eyes to peek
Yep.
under the hood and make some adjustments.
Exactly. And an interim can also help a board of directors redesign a position description.
Mhm.
Take a look at what the staffing model looks like. Are they really in need of to replace the person who left? Or has the organization changed or grown so that a different position may be the best next step? That, again, is, I think, the advantage of taking a breath, taking a step back, bringing in expertise who can fill the gap, and being able to really explore and evaluate what staffing model makes the most sense. I'm sure in HR you go through the same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Vicky. So we've talked about quite a bit. And if you had to boil it down to say, what are the 3 or 4 best practices or tips that you would give to help organizations prepare for leadership change and to be able to navigate it successfully? What are those 3 to 4 best practices?
I think first and foremost, and we've talked about this throughout our session today, is to really make sure you've got an updated succession plan in place. And I can't stress enough that even putting it into your strategic plan and making sure that you're always looking at your staffing plan and what happens when there are holes, gaps, departures, etc., and making sure that there is a plan in place for that. I can tell you as a for instance, when I was an executive director of a very large national organization, I made known that their strategic planning process for their 3-year plan that I would be leaving at the end of those 3 years.
Mhm.
It allowed them the opportunity and I think the advantage of being able to plan for 3 years in their strategic plan, what that would look like, when things would happen, how that transition would go. And as a result, it was good for me as an outgoing leader, and it was good for the organization. So I can't stress enough looking at succession of leadership at all levels, to your point. I think the second thing that I would follow that up with is the conversation we were just having about bringing in the tools that you need to make transition reasonable, and even positive for the organization, making sure whether it's an interim, a fractional, moving someone else from internally into the position, making sure that you don't force yourself into a harried process of replacing a leader, a CEO, an executive director. Make sure that the organization allows itself the time to recalibrate what it's doing and to make sure that you're actually looking for the position that you need. I said this at the very beginning of our session, and I've been doing a lot of research on it because we deal with fractional staffing. But there's a real staffing sort of crisis going on right now where organizations are not sure in many cases what they need to reach their goals. We go through this a lot in intake with potential clients. And often the position that they think they're looking to fill or think they need is not necessarily what we end up with in order to reach their goals. So that would be the other piece that I would say. Take the time, get the tools, make sure that you have the gap filled so that you can really look at what it is that you need. I would also offer that, in transition, involve the staff. Make sure that everyone is involved, all your key stakeholders, your board, your staff, your teams. This is not, the board just selecting someone and putting them in a position. This is really a major community event. And I think the more that people are involved, the more successful that transition becomes. And then finally, I'm a big believer in friendly handoffs. We're going through this with a client right now where we, in fact, have been the interim, and they took 9 months to bring in a new CEO. And we are now going through the friendly, warm handoff piece, and we'll be doing that through September. So even though he will be starting the 1st of July, and actually has started to dip his toe in the water now. We will be continuing that for 3 months through September, the end of September. And that's to make sure that those very valuable relationships at all levels are successfully transferred. The warmth and the community that we have built over the years preceding the new CO is continued afterwards. So that I think is one of the most important things in transition.
So if I'm going to sum this up, which keeps resonating in my head based on what you just shared, is that change equals opportunity.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
don't throw away the opportunity to step back, bring in the tools and resources that you need to really evaluate what you need moving forward and to embrace the community
Yes.
that will be impacted by the change in helping you shape what that future looks like.
We have actually in transitions in the past, Allison, done, farewell tours and welcome tours sort of together with, a really good relationship says to your stakeholders, your clients, your customers, your donors, that this is an organization that knows how to do it right. This is an organization that I can count on. My relationship is special and valuable because they are taking the time to really show me my value to the community. And that's where I think transitions sometimes get cut short or abbreviated or rushed through. And you miss that opportunity. There are a lot of organizations that take advantage of a CEO retiring or leading to do major fundraising campaigns, et cetera. I mean, there are a lot of, to your point, opportunities. It's also a huge responsibility of the board of directors to make sure that those choices are well made. So you weigh the opportunities with duty, but I think if well planned, it can be a game changer for an organization.
Vicki, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and you've shared so many great tips for our listeners to think about in preparation for future change. I just want to thank you, Vicki Burkhart, founder and CEO of More Than Giving, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great to be here, Allison. I appreciate it. You're a great partner.
You're a great partner. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to Hold On, Let Me Close My Door. Until next time.